I think this is more interesting to listen.
Okay.
More interesting to receive than to
Where's Tom? Okay. Okay, I think we'll get started here. We have about an hour and 15 minutes for this broadband panel. Now, I know that especially for people who know me, the question everyone's wondering is what exactly happened to my head and my hair. And it's even worse, actually, if I'll turn around and show you that I have a stripe on the back of my head. I thought about thinking of some excuse why that was important for some symbol of the conference. But in fact, it's actually Tom's fault, because on Friday he said I needed to get a haircut. Thanks, Dad. So late at night I broke out the clippers and forgot to put the clipper guard on, and zip. And I figured explaining it to everybody was cheaper than getting another haircut. And that says an awful lot about me, I realize. Okay, so now in this we have a lot of great.
You have a lot of talents. It may not be one.
Exactly. Thank you. And I like to promote the ones that I'm not talented in. So the format of this panel, I'm going to quickly introduce the speakers, and then we'll start asking some questions and having a conversation, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions from the audience. And if people don't have questions, then I'm going to start calling on people. So I hope you have questions. So just quickly. Everyone's sitting here in alphabetical order. Basically, we have Meredith Baker, who's the commissioner at the FCC, and prior to that, she was acting assistant secretary of commerce at NTIA. And we have Shane Greenstein here, who is the Elinor and Wendell Hobbs Professor of Management and Strategy at the Kellogg School at Northwestern. He's done an awful lot of research on business economics of computing, communications, internet infrastructure. I'm going to turn to Shane a lot and put him in an uncomfortable position of saying things that might not be popular. Then we have Fernando Laguarda, who is Vice President of External Affairs and Policy Counselor at Time Warner Cable, where he focuses on consumer protection, competition issues, intellectual property, and telecommunications regulation. We have Blair Levin, who is now the Communications and Society Fellow at the Aspen Institute, following his departure from the FCC, where he was head of the National Broadband Plan, and my boss. And no longer my boss, so I can ask him anything I want now.
You did that while you were working for me.
That's true. And Walter McCormick, who's president and CEO of the USTelecom Association. And before that, he was also president and CEO of the American Trucking Association, worked for the Department of General Counsel for the Department of Commerce, several other positions. And we have Tom Sugrue, who's vice president of government affairs at T-Mobile. And he, before that, he was chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau at the FCC. Okay, now, the big issue right now in Washington, as Tom Taki mentioned, is net neutrality, the Title I, Title II debate, the Google Verizon proposal. But rather than talking about that specifically, because I'm not sure what else we can say to that, and also because as an economist, I like to think of the opportunity cost of things, and the opportunity cost of that discussion is what other issues are not being discussed about telecom. So I'd like to back up a little bit and sort of ask the broader question, and maybe we can start with Meredith on this, with Commissioner Baker on this, which is what are the crucial policy broadband issues that we should be focusing on, rather than specific issues like net neutrality? What are the big policy questions facing broadband, and what are the policy levers that government can use to deal with them?
Well, I appreciate you starting with me, but you probably should start with Blair, because Blair's your project was really quite terrific in answering some of these questions. I think this philosophically, I believe that we should have minimal regulatory intervention. I think we need to focus on issues that really matter, like universal service reform. And I think you've heard this already this morning so many times, but it's really regulatory certainty and stability that's going to help us have the environment that continues broadband to be built out. I personally think that we've done a pretty good job at the infrastructure build of broadband at this point. I think we have some adoption issues, and we need to be focusing on adoption.
Blair?
Well, first of all, let me just publicly, I've never had a chance to do this, but just I wanted to thank Scott for joining the broadband team. He did a great job. The document that we wrote was a team effort, and nobody claimed individual credit, but I do have to say that some of the best ideas in there were Scott's, and more importantly, some of the worst ideas that weren't in there were because Scott challenged us in a variety of different ways. Let me just start by responding to a couple things Carly said. First, the notion that in business, you don't get to make stuff up. I worked on Wall Street for 8 years. I have an answer to her. Bernie Madoff. you actually do get to make stuff. The point is the consequences are different, and they often catch up with you much faster. That's a small point. The big point, and this follows up with what Meredith just said, is she actually is actually wrong about something she started with, which is that anyone, anywhere, anytime can communicate. There are 7 million American homes that don't have access to what we consider to be a suitable broadband network. There are 93 million Americans who don't have it in their homes. That's a really big issue. I tend to agree with Meredith that that's actually a more important thing. I will say very quickly that it was interesting, the Pew study that came out, a lot of people looked at that and said there isn't popular support for extensive government efforts in broadband. Actually, if you look at the internals, there's about 75% support for government doing some things on it. But even though Scott and I and Phoebe and others worked 80 hours a week for a significant amount of time, really driving to get broadband everywhere, I do have a certain level of sympathy for the majority. About 52% didn't want extensive government efforts. And I think that goes to two very important things. Number one, all policy is about both vision and execution. And if the execution is bad, the vision doesn't matter. And I think when people look at how government executes on things like universalization, they are correct to be skeptical of even the things that we recommended. What I mean by that is the current universal service system is horribly flawed. It creates false incentives. It creates situations where we're paying one phone company $17,000 per line per year. I know the joke in the Bureau is it would be cheaper to move them to Bethesda. And it turns out to be, you could pay for a very nice house in Bethesda with that and get a good, a choice between Comcast and Fios. But the point is, if we don't fix that, and part of the broadband plan is about fixing it, the vision of broadband doesn't matter. The second point is, the reason why it's important is not because of the networks, but because of the applications. It's very important, and other people have talked about it. Tom talked about it. Meredith certainly talked about it. It's healthcare, it's education. 75% of kids now do their homework with the primary tool being the internet. The 25% who don't have access in the homes, they're putting them at a huge disadvantage. But we as a country haven't done an effective job at utilizing the platform for essentially public services, services where the government is either the sole provider or the single biggest buyer. Until we start doing those applications, it is understandable that the public doesn't understand why it is that it's a public necessity as opposed to simply something where you're doing multiplayer games with kids in Korea or something like that. So so the universal service, very big. A bunch of others, spectrum reform, very big. I think the transparency agenda, which Tom talked about, there's a lot about that in the plan that's very important. I think rights of way reform is very important. But in a lot of ways, the biggest thing is how do we transform the way government utilizes broadband to deliver very important services.
Walter, you have a lot of members who care a lot about these issues, and especially the universal service aspects of it, and bringing broadband to the last groups, whether it's people who have it, who don't have access to what we consider broadband or who aren't subscribing. Do you have thoughts on these issues? If you want to follow up.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. Scott, I think that government's at its best when it reaches out to people. It is aspirational. At the beginning of this administration, there was really an atmosphere that was unique. The National Broadband Plan was basically an invitation that was issued to say, let's see if we can build something together. And what we saw was that people responded. I once had an educator who said the easiest thing in the world is to divide people. It's really difficult to bring people together. And I saw for the better part of a year, the FCC really under Blair's leadership, reaching out to people, engaging with people, really listening to people, and saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could build something together? And the National Broadband Plan came out with a series of objectives that really focused on two really overriding core objectives, which was let's get deployment out to everybody. Who could disagree with that? And secondly, let's make sure that once everybody has access, let's make sure that it's possible for them to adopt it, possible for them to use it, that they have the digital literacy that's necessary, that if they need economic assistance, that is there, that the services that would allow them or encourage them to make use of this technology would be available. And so we really saw the National Broadband Plan as a pretty singular accomplishment. It was something that was not met with any kind of real criticism. It was not something that was put forward in a partisan way. It was a real opportunity to unite people. And we think that it basically identified the right things in the area of deployment. It talked about the importance of addressing the financial fundamentals of USF and intercarrier comp, which we think are right. It talked about the need to rely upon private sector investment for the most part. And it talked about the key issues with regard to adoption. So we think that, we have tended to look at the net neutrality issue as being one that really impacts investment and deployment. Others have looked at it as being sort of the all-important social issue. But the National Broadband Plan never articulated as a problem that consumers are being blocked, impaired, that there's degraded service. It talked about these larger issues that were really aspirational for our country. So our hope as an industry is that we will be able to get back to the broadband plan, that we will be able to get back to these consensus objectives, that to the extent that net neutrality is an issue that needs to be resolved, that there will be an acknowledgement of the fact that there is both an investment and deployment aspect to this that needs to be addressed, and that there are also certain social aspirations for the way in which we want to have the internet operate. But this need not be addressed on sort of a partisan basis. And I think that the way that Tom laid it out today really demonstrated a really good faith effort to forward a policy proposal that was meant to try and bridge the gaps.
Tom, where does wireless fit into this?
Well, I think a very important role. It is the mobile broadband networks, I think, are going to play increasingly, maybe the leading role eventually in broadband service to Americans. I do want to add, and I apologize for this, is sort of piling on in a positive sense, but since Blair's not at the FCC anymore, we can't get any points by saying nice things about him.
Yes, you can.
Points for heaven, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. But we too think that was an excellent effort, and the spectrum section I commend to everyone. In a relatively short, I actually took it with me on the plane just to take a look at it again, and was impressed again with the analytic rigor and the vision and so forth. We do appreciate Blair reaching out. He reached out to us a number of times. Every time he did, we got a set of homework assignments. We finally stopped taking this. I thought I was working for him as well as Scott. So we need a study on this. We need something on anything. So to supplement the record. But there are a lot of great ideas there. And one of the very frustrating things about this whole net neutrality debate, and you picked it up in Tom's comments as well, was it has really sucked the energy and time and attention out of the public policy community around the FCC and broadband issues and at the highest levels dealing with this issue. And there's probably, in my 30 years in this field, I don't think I've ever seen so much turmoil and around, driven by so little in a way in terms of the actual harm you point to. I'll just only add on when I saw the Verizon Google deal and its approach to wireless, which was not wireless networks should be able to block everything in the world. It was just the opposite. It said it's not going on now. It's changing very rapidly. Let's just hold off, watchful waiting. We're going to have a GAO annual report. You know, the FCC does an annual report on the mobile space, does an annual report on broadband deployment. Now we're going to do a GAO report on mobile broadband. But fine if we wanted to do that. That, I think, would have been a better approach, and let us turn to this. Hopefully, some resolution of that will be worked out in the relatively near future. We could get back to these other issues. Spectrum, and I don't want to take too much time. We can get back to it and all, but I was struck by something Carly said about 1995, and that was the start of the tech boom. In the wireless world, one thing that happened then was that was the start of the PCS auctions, and that was where the FCC found 120 megahertz and put that into the marketplace. It absolutely revolutionized mobile services in this country. Think of what it was before then. 2 carriers, limited service, just voice, very expensive, about maybe 20 million subscribers around the country. Huge influx in competition, huge increase in innovation in different services. And I'd like to see us have another 1995 where we found a significant amount of spectrum to put in the marketplace. I think we'd see the same results in the broadband world.
Where do you think it's, what do you think I don't want to ask you to predict the future, but how is wireless, what's going to be the role of wireless in providing broadband? How is that going to affect this whole, since I'm sitting next to Blair, I have to say it, ecosystem. I mean, we already see sort of average broadband speeds in lots of countries around the world coming down, not because fixed networks are getting worse, but because people are using wireless more and more. What do you see as the effects of that? Would wireless ever become a true substitute for
Well, it's a substitute on the margin now. I don't know that it's a full substitute. I have a wired connection at home and don't intend to cut it, because even though, and I think a lot of people be like that. On the other hand, some people do. So, I mean, I think it can provide some competitive alternative. It clearly is a complementary service. I mean, people now are used to having those, the ability to do things like, well, of course, emails and messaging and things like that, but well beyond that now. I mean, people, download those videos all the time, and we're developing these devices that have great displays, that have fast processors built into them. It's not all in the network. So I don't know that it'll ever completely replace. I mean, our networks are getting faster and faster, but so are the wireline guys. But it certainly will be a strong complement and an adequate substitute for some people.
Can I just real quickly say something? First of all, because I think I talked about the Pew study earlier. I think Pew, and I think you pointed this out to me, something that got no attention was approximately 20% of the respondents said their primary access to the internet was through a mobile service, which is much higher than I would have thought at this early stage. Whether or not it becomes a real competitor, we'll see. The second thing, I was talking to Paul Sagan, the CEO of Akamai, the other day, and his projection is 5 years from now, it'll be the majority. That is to say, the majority of the time Americans are interacting with the broadband internet, they'll be doing it over a mobile device.
I think that's right. I think that's right. It's also generational, because I think if you look at those numbers, and that's a perfect number if you take the entire population, but if you look at the 19 to 29-year-olds, then you're looking at 90% of mobile penetration. So I think it really is, you see where it's going.
But I think in many cases, people, when they don't differentiate between a full mobile network and sort of a localized wireless connection. So for example, my son's a junior in college. He has wireless internet access in his college campus. It's basically a wireline connection with a Wi-Fi connection. When he goes to a hotel, he wants to know if they have wireless internet access at the hotel. So I think that to a large extent, what we're seeing is a good thing in terms of the technologies becoming seamless and transparent to the consumer. I read recently where today 35% of the Wi-Fi connections that are actually voice connections that are utilizing Wi-Fi, and I think T-Mobile has something like 1.5 million voice calls a month that are now going through Wi-Fi connections. So as we go down this path, I know one of the issues on the sort of the wireless wireline Title II net neutrality issue has been, is wireless distinct? Clearly, technologically, full mobile wireless is. But I also have viewed the Google, Verizon proposals and others as not being aimed at providing a competitive benefit in the marketplace to wireless that's based on a regulatory advantage, But instead, it's trying to make sure that there's not a regulatory disadvantage to making sure that as networks develop, that it can be driven by technology as opposed to being driven by regulatory policy. Because ultimately, that's what we want. We want to have the most efficient technologies that are the most consumer-friendly, and that will inevitably involve some mix of wireline and wireless.
Fernando, that's a good time to bring you in. I think you've been thinking a lot about sort of what additional business models cable might be involved in someday, and how new technologies are changing the market and competition and so on.
Thanks, Scott. I guess I also need to say, since the real point of the panel is to extend appreciation to Blair for the hard work that he put into the broadband plan,
So kind.
which I also echo, because I think it did do exactly what it should have done and was established to do in terms of setting out a vision. Yeah, Scott, you and I have talked about this, and it is an issue that I thought about during Carly's speech. The role of new business models, and when we talk about solving the challenges that the broadband plan has identified, especially with respect to reaching underserved Americans, the adoption challenge. One of the things that cable has a very strong history of, when you think about the introduction of pay television and the transformation of television, the expansion of the marketplace, and really the creation of tremendous amount of consumer surplus and benefits, is that history of transformative business models. And I think that looking at the internet as well, with an eye towards business model innovation, is really important. And there is a policy challenge in that regard, which is, what are the policy levers that make sense in an environment where you need business model innovation? When you talk about things that sound very positive and proactive, like transparency and openness, you have to be sensitive to the fact that business model innovation, revenue streams, identifying customers, identifying market needs, and also making predictions about the future, which is very difficult to do, require a lot of subtlety, a lot of consultation and care, rather than establishing rigid guidelines or restrictions. So I think you have to be very sensitive to that, and I think you have to realize that there's a tremendous amount of change going on even now. I recently purchased one of those little towers for my house to expand the cell phone coverage in my house. So now my cell calls are going over Comcast's broadband out of my house, right? So I have a 3G call that's being VoIPed and sent over the internet. And I try to explain this to my kids, and they don't know what that means, right? They just know, oh, I have better coverage inside the house. That's great. Is that wireless? Is that wireline? What's the business there? All of this is happening and evolving and creating opportunities, I think, for new ways to serve consumers. So we go back to, I think, really a fundamental point, which is having a vision is really important, and executing on that vision requires creativity, particularly in the way we think about business models.
Shane, you've spent much of your career thinking about innovation in these types of industries, and I know that you have some potential concerns now. I know I'm setting you up here as the bad guy in the room, but tell us a little bit about that.
Can I compliment the National Broadband Plan?
No more compliments.
Oh, wonderful. Can't work on it.
And also, I don't know if we talked a little bit about some ideas on transparency, and I know there's I don't know if you want to comment on that too.
Well, first, let's do the thing that the thing I know I was brought here to raise. Let's think about the era we just lived through. Actually, Carly talked about 1995. Let's take 1990. Let's take 2 decades. We've actually gone through something rather extraordinary. You look at household expenditure today for broadband internet, and you see the typical household today, $500, of expenditure for a good that didn't exist 2 decades ago. So just to step back for a minute and talk about, if I can talk like an economist for a minute, you rarely ever see differences in the expenditure in a household between a daughter and a mother, between a father and a son. And here we're actually, we just lived through one. Our kids really will have a very different expenditure pattern than the parent. Now that's pretty extraordinary, but it also raises a question, and that's the uncomfortable question I know I'm supposed to raise. When you look at expenditure, the typical thing an economist will do is look to get a price deflator for it. And the reason you want a price index is because you want to know whether the prices for the goods are going up, whether the quality is changing, the prices are coming down because you're getting more quality for the price of the thing that you're paying for. So let's just ask the question. What's the price of broadband expenditure in the US? How does it compare with other countries? How does it compare over time? Are we getting the same thing over time? And how does it compare with other parts of the internet ecosystem? It's asked that question also. So I think most of you know what the rest of the internet ecosystem looks like. But let me remind you, if you go look at a PC, for example, and you do a quality adjustment to the prices, you will get minimum 15, 20% a year declines in prices, quality adjusted. You do that in printers, that's what you'll get also. You do that in storage, you'll get the same answer. You do that in digital cameras the last decade, you'll get the same answer. You do that anywhere in servers, you get the same answer. You do that in handsets, even the things you walk around with, you get the same answer. 10% a year minimum, 20% maximum. You go look in the Consumer Price Index, all parts of electronics have this kind of history over the last decade or two, and sometimes much longer. Now, just raises the question, what's the experience in broadband internet? I'm sorry, but you just don't see this kind of price history at all. What you see in the last decade was something actually quite extraordinary, and it's wonderful. You saw an upgrade from dial-up to broadband. It was a one-time event. Now, every household who went through that actually got a wonderful increase in the quality of their service. It was also an increase in revenue for the vendors. And so you actually got one of those rare economic events where everybody wins. The suppliers get more revenue, the consumers got more service, and everybody was happier. You also got one other additional thing, which is just remarkable, by the way, again, if you take a 2-decade view. Look at the other parts of the internet ecosystem, they also benefited. So if you look at the advertising supported part of the internet, if you had more people on broadband, that meant that the households were spending more time online, which meant that was a higher quality visit to an advertising supported site, which meant the site became more valuable. If you have more people on broadband, that also meant you have a higher quality visit to electronic commerce. So electronic retailing also just had its value raised. They didn't have to do anything other than just be there, and they have higher quality visits coming their way. And so they were happier too. That's the experience we actually had in the last decade. That's a wonderful experience. The problem is we're almost at the end of it. So I'm paid to look around a corner, so I'm looking around a corner. We have 2/3 of US households online, and we pretty much know we're not going to get upwards of 3/4 or much more than that. That's only a couple years out. And then there's this question, there's this recurring expenditure that all our kids are going to go through. And it's actually a significant part of their budget. You got to ask, where are the improvements coming from? Is it coming from the hardware and the transmission part of the internet ecosystem, or is it going to come from other parts? And is that wonderful thing we've all lived through, where all the parts everybody's happy with one another, is that going to continue? And if the price experience we're looking at in the last 5 years continues, I'm actually quite worried and concerned that we're not going to see that. And so, Scott knows this. I sat down with Ryan McDevitt, and we sat down and made a price index for the last 5 years in the U.S. in broadband services. And, we didn't see prices come down very much. We did the quality adjustments the way you're supposed to do them, and it just didn't make a whole lot of difference because there just isn't a whole lot going on. You see a little bit in cable, to their credit, but the max we got was about 10% over 5 years, which just isn't very much in comparison to the rest of the internet. So that raises a lot of uncomfortable questions. I know that was my job, so I'll raise them.
Right. So a couple of things here. With the first question, I'd ask, see if anyone on the panel wants to comment, is, is it the right comparison? Do you want to compare this broadband infrastructure to the other parts of the ecosystem? Are there certain things that just, where the prices can't come down much more, than it has? What would be the explanation, I guess, for this sort of lack of price decline? And second, is there an answer? Where are the big improvements going to come from over time? We have this huge, improvement going from dial-up to broadband, and then each incremental improvement in speed is not nearly the same as going from dial-up to broadband. So do we continue to get these same incremental benefits as we move forward?
I think it's a good question. There are two parts to it that come to mind in terms of answering. I mean, my own experience and the information that I have, I've only been at my company for a little over a year, but since 1995 or 96, in terms of quality, I know speed has gone up by a factor of 10, and prices remain relatively flat during that time. So I'm sure you did the adjustments, but it would be interesting to see, not just looking at speed, which is the one thing that comes to mind, but other aspects in terms of the reliability of the service. Yeah. So I do think making, the whole study of hedonic regression and adjustment is beyond my skill as a lawyer, but is certainly mischievous enough to know that there's a lot that can go into it.
But taking it down is not beyond your skill as a lawyer.
But so I think it's an important point to make, and it's important to keep industry thinking about it. But I do think that there are a number of different aspects, just in terms of the quality of the service, that may be complicated to adjust for, but I do think the one I know about in terms of speed has improved significantly. And I'm not taking into account the sort of order of magnitude change from dial-up to broadband. Then there's the aspect just in terms of how much consumers value it and how much we're told they value it and how much our own customers say they value it, which is significant. Perhaps even they value it more than they're even paying for it. So there is a sort of the other aspect, which is it's a valuable product. It's also an input as a product to other activities and other products, unlike, say, a handset or a PC. So perhaps whether you think of it as, a general purpose technology or some other type of product, a comparison to those types of consumer products is inadequate. But I think your criticism is, well worth making, and I think that there are answers to it. And the fact is, I believe our customers value the service.
I was just going to add, and I'm not familiar with the study, so I may be sort of talking past them and all, but let me address speed as well, because it's a metric we know. I joined T-Mobile in 2003. Our data service at the time was something called GPRS. That was rated at about 20 kilobits a second. About 2005, 2006, we implemented something called EDGE, which was sort of called 2.5G. Maximum speeds 384 kilobits, actual speeds to the customer about 100. 2008 to this year, we've been implementing our 3G service, 7.2 megabits a second. And this year, we're putting in HSPA plus 21 megs a second. We have 120 million pops covered, 200 million by the end of the year. We'll have the fastest network in the country by the end of the year, which will be nice. So we went from, in just my time with the company, 20 kilobits a second to 20 megabits a second. So that's 1,000 times in 7 years, the increase in speed. What about prices? Prices, if anything, have gone down. I mean, we didn't quite have, it's hard to compare because the volumes you can do are so much. I mean, we have unlimited data plans now, and depending on whether you're getting it by itself or adding to something else, it's $30 or $40 a month. And we have a 5 gigabit a month soft cap, and by soft cap, you don't get shut off. We have the right to throttle you a bit. Frankly, I don't think we ever do it, but not that many people get there either.
So we don't need to worry about the cap?
You don't have to worry about the cap. Well, I don't know what you're doing on the cap, but anyway. So, and of course, we're all looking at different ways to price the thing and so forth. So it's hard for me, and again, without doubting the research, to put the reality I'm seeing in what we're doing with the things that say it's pretty flat, there's not much progress here. But
I don't think you don't have wireless in the data.
Can I just add, on Wall Street, we always say, past performance of a firm is not necessarily indicative. And I think there are two really big things we know, and then a bunch of things we don't know. So the two big things we know is that cable is upgrading DOCSIS 3, and that's going to raise the performance tremendously. I don't think it's going to raise the price that much, but I'm not really sure it depends on how they price it, but I'm not sure people are going to buy it because the applications aren't there yet. Second thing we know is at least there is one 4G build out that currently is offering service in a variety of places, and there'll be two more of great importance, AT&T and Verizon's, with Clearwire already building out. Here are the things we don't know. We don't know, number one, how the applications evolve. Right now, given the current use of applications, there is no mass market use for 100 megs. If that stays the same, then logically the wireless will actually will provide significant competition, with people possibly cutting the cord, possibly not, depending on it. But applications may evolve. We don't know what Walter's companies will do, particularly those who currently just offer kind of a DSL speed. And so, there's a lot of different scenarios one might look to in 2015. It could be that there's tremendous competition on the low end, lowering the price. But on the other hand, it could be that applications with video evolve so that you actually get less competition. It's just, I think you have to, from a policy perspective, you have to look at that and know when you're supposed to act and when you're not supposed to act. And we, so obviously in the broadband plan, felt so many different scenarios. There's not something that we can say, here's something because of what we might fear in 2015, we should take action today. Rather, we think those, both the wireless investments and the DOCSIS 3 are really great, and we should let it see how it plays out. And if there's a problem, you address it then.
And I would assume that, Tom alluded a little bit to this in his speech today, but originally when people went from dial-up to broadband, they were getting faster email. They were able to access their office faster. But as we move forward and people want to take advantage of, when they want to add on additional services, maybe it is a health monitoring service, maybe it's home security, maybe it's a special distance education program to learn a new language. And at some point, you would assume that there is going to be pricing bundles that are going to be offered in the same way as if you buy something from Land's End today, you don't think that you're paying Federal Express anything, but Land's End is certainly paying Federal Express. And so and Land's End, of course, is negotiating with Federal Express and UPS to try and drive down a price, and that leads to a drive down a price. These are the kinds of issues that become really important, though, in the net neutrality debate. The FCC's notice of proposed rulemaking, for example, says that no one other than the end user shall be charged for service. So if along comes somebody who says, I'll tell you what, if you're willing to watch a commercial every time you turn on your internet access, we'll let the commercial provider pay for your internet access and you can have it for a discount or maybe even for free. That then becomes an issue of prioritization and impacts this whole creativity to be able to come up with these kinds of business plans that lead to new kinds of bundled offerings.
No, Walter pretty much said what I was going to say, which is I really do, the conversation, pricing, both throughput and speeds have obviously, we've had some great dramatic improvements in all of those. But I think where we're going next is kind of a more interesting question. And where we're going next probably is tiered pricing. And I think that we're going to see some dramatic changes in the usage of the internet. And I think a lot of it is from the innovative offerings that we're going to see. And I think the culture of free on the internet is probably different as well. That's going to change. People are going to have to pay for things on the internet, whether it's the content or whether it's the special services that they want. So I think that we are going to see probably, who knows what we're going to see by 2015, but I think we're going to have a dramatically different user situation and pricing situation than we have currently.
We focus a lot on speed as the metric, and in part just because it's something we sort of can measure. Is that the right thing to be focusing on? We saw in the broadband plan that most things people do, even the relatively high bandwidth things, don't require a lot of speed per se. Are there other metrics that we should be thinking about and focusing on as more important that maybe we don't control for when creating price indices, or that is really something consumers need to know to run particular applications that's at least as important as speed or more important?
Well, let me just add, one thing speed does is it enables a lot of innovation in other things. The faster the network is, what happens? Applications develop to make use of that speed. So things you couldn't do before become possible, or you could have done it, but it would just take too long. The websites get richer, whether graphically, in terms of pictures, in terms of being able to provide video. You can see this, snapshot, Now when I go to ESPN, on my mobile device, I can watch the highlight, not just see a text listing the score and things like that. So a lot of the innovation is enabled by increased speed. So it's not just sort of, geez, it's faster, but who really uses it? People start using it whether they think they're doing it or not. And it's either it's a virtuous cycle sometimes, one thing drives the other in terms of innovation. If you're trying to operate a network, it can be a vicious cycle because you put additional speed in there and think you're pretty good. And in a very short period of time, you're running out of bandwidth, which means new technology, more spectrum, and so forth. So it's hard to chase that and all, but I think speed is a real, at least in the world we work in, an enabler of lots of other types of innovations.
Well, I'll take the view that from a policy perspective, we generally overemphasize speed. That people talk about, Korea has 100 megabits. Again, not quite clear what they're doing with it. No evidence, correct me if I'm wrong, that speed has led to some economic growth that we're not seeing here in the United States. A quick thing, one of my favorite ideas from the kind of grew out of the plan was we really need to replace all textbooks with ebooks, not in terms of just taking that information, turning it into a PDF and putting it on a Kindle, but rather changing the whole ecosystem. And Eric Garr and I, who worked together on the plan, wrote an editorial in the Post on this. And the rural guys wrote a letter to the Post saying, well, it's all nice for them to talk about all the wonderful things this can do, but these guys want to create a digital divide because they only want to fund 4 megabits down. So I called up the person who wrote the letter and said, let me come over and talk to you and ask the following question. What is it that we said in terms of an e-textbook cannot be done with 4 megabits? And she said nothing. No, you can certainly do it. My point is, the real value of this stuff is in the applications, it's not in the speed. And that the government, I agree with your point that you have to keep going faster. There were a number of things that we had in the plan about making sure, for example, I think research institutions need very high speeds, and we're very grateful that Internet 2 and Lambda Rail exist. If they did not exist, we would have had to propose them in the plan because it's very important that certain segments of the market have extraordinary high speeds. But the government, in the policy debate, we often get obsessed with kind of like beating Korea or beating Singapore or something, and as far as we can tell, that matters far less. But it's the stuff we're talking about actually is very difficult to measure, and one of the things that we talked about a lot was at every kind of transformative technology, the metrics are almost always wrong because you don't really know what you're supposed to measure. So, we did not measure efficiency gains with computers back in the early 90s. But back in the 1890s and the early 1900s, you couldn't measure efficiency gains with electricity. But obviously, it led to huge economic growth and stuff. And so my only point is, while speed is important, we really ought to look to how we're using it as the true measure. And I would just end by saying Korea already has an initiative to replace all textbooks with ebooks. And if you look at what they're doing and what I think the educational achievement that will lead to, that worries me a lot more in terms of international competitiveness than just the speed of the network.
And Texas will be able to remove all references to evolution just
like that.
Can I just reply quickly? Two things. In the mobile world, it may be we're still on that part of the curve in terms of the speeds we're doing that where you really do see a lot of benefit from it. And then even like with the textbook example, the ability to do ebooks and have it be, just like the book you can hold in your hand with paper is one thing. But the next step is really that ebook should be able to do more. It should have videos embedded in it. It should have interactive stuff and be a lot better than the textbook. So I still think speed enables, although you're quite right, we do these international comparisons and get ourselves tied in a knot, and we got OECD and this group and that group, and frankly, the focus is wrong there.
I mean, you've heard this line out. People have heard this line out of me before, but I'd say you can't necessarily measure some things, but the absence of some things means you're in a bad situation. So at least you can do that. And so I put down 4 things that a policy community should worry about. One is economic experiments. You should see lots of experiments from those involved in the internet ecosystem. That means you should be seeing failure. You should see trials, stuff. You don't know where the demand is, so firms are trying different things. You should expect the content firms to be trying different stuff, and some of them, do okay, and a lot of them don't. That's great. And if you don't see that, then you should be worried. Another thing you should expect to see is vigorous standards competition. So, it's already come up here. Different standards, different ways of doing interoperability between data. You should expect to see competition among different modes and different standards. And actually, if you don't see it, you almost should be worried. It's actually great that you have choice. It's wonderful. The mess is a good thing. I know it's tough to live through it. It's tough to manage, but I actually think that's a wonderful thing. A third thing you should see is a lot of entrepreneurs. If you don't see the entrepreneurs, that's when you really ought to start to get worried. That's not necessarily the same as the economic experiments, although the entrepreneurs tend to be the ones who take some of the crazier risks. But you should expect to see some of them. And then the fourth thing you should not see a lot of one-sided bargaining. I mean, it should not be an ecosystem in which one player can dictate to others repeatedly. I know there's every antitrust lawyer in the room just went, whoa! Yeah, I know, I understand. But we're just giving quick answers here. But you can't measure more here, right? But you can measure the absence of all 4 of those things.
So about a year ago, maybe it was a little more than a year ago, you said the answer to this was we're seeing glimmers of the good things.
Well, that's
so what do you say now?
Certainly, we see vigorous standards competition. I think that the discussion just here about DOCSIS and different ways to do wireless. That's a great sign. My friends in the Valley are worried. I mean, we could probably get different opinions from the room. Are worried about the ecosystem and investing in it. That worries me too. We're still seeing some experiments. Still are. That's great. I worry a little bit again going down around the corner. And I'll leave to the antitrust lawyers to assert something on the last one.
So can I ask a question of Shane?
Yeah.
Because I hadn't asked you this before, so it's not rehearsed, but what's the role for government, particularly in the standards wars? I mean, you want to see vigorous standards competition. At what point is it appropriate, and in what way?
You don't want governments choosing the standard. Let's at least say that. You actually want, by and large, you want the governments to encourage multiple choices. So there are these mistakes from time to time see governments try to dictate standards. So I would say that's a mistake you want to avoid. That would be one. There is a natural role for government in some parts in spectrum because of interference issues and the very complicated engineering questions. So you have to have some role there, obviously. Do you have something else, do you think?
I'm going to say that I think that government should create the environment to enable the standards or the entrepreneurs. I've spent a lot of my time on things that didn't work out. Ultra wideband, I think we were really excited about enabling that. Broadband over power lines, goodness, we took 10 million tests to enable that we notched those frequencies so broadband over power lines could roll out. That didn't really work out for us either, but we see it. We need to move forward, say, in white spaces. Is that really going to generate all of the next generation of Wi-Fi demand? I mean, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I think we need to move forward. So I think it's government's job to create the environment and the entrepreneur's job to see if and the market to see if it works out.
We should probably take some questions. We don't have a lot of time left. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, the mic's coming right. There you are.
I really appreciate the focus on speed and wondering how important that is. I spent the summer in Japan, and actually made a side trip to Korea. And even though they've got this great speeds, the debate over there is, why isn't anyone adopting? The rates are, they're thinking 30% adopt, what can we do? And Japan is doing it because the government, as a 35% shareholder, is making them do it, and the 65% private shareholders are screaming bloody murder. Why are you cross-subsidizing telephone revenues in a fiber that's not paying out and has no reasonable prospect to 20% take rates? And so it's when I hear us talk about why aren't we catching up with Korea in speed, the Koreans are saying, why are we spending all this money on bandwidth that nobody wants until the next cycle comes? But what strikes me is if you look at the two big spikes that changed it for us, one was we all know the 95, 96 spike when the Mosaic browser put pictures on, and we had 800, 900% growth for 2 years. And the other moment was the PC adoption in the mid-'80s, where all of a sudden people were transferring files instead of just typing in dumb terminals. And all of a sudden when you hang PCs on, you're transferring whole files. Now what's really weird about that is both jumps came from complementary technologies outside the network itself. And it makes me wonder, when we talk about speed and all these other things, the real drivers have been someplace else, and the people who've got the speed kind of don't know what to do with it. And so it makes me wonder if we should think about different parts of the space than just the network and being fascinated with the raw numbers.
I would add to that keyword search at the beginning of this decade. I mean, Google's invention of keyword search was just absolutely phenomenal enabler. Yeah.
I associate with Blair's remarks earlier on speed. I think that speed's important. The reason I kind of had a eureka at some point. The reason we spend so much time on speed is because you actually have to have a baseline of speed. So why did we choose 4 megabits per second? Because you actually have to fund it through universal service. If we're going to say that broadband is critical infrastructure and we're going to fund it through universal service, then you actually have to define it by a speed. And I think, of course, it's important to always look, revisit that speed at a regular basis. But what if somebody doesn't want the speed, they want the mobility? I mean, I think that it is overblown on speed, and certainly there are other factors that are going to be more important. And, things like cloud computing, another dramatic change.
Well, that's one difference between the way our country's doing it and some of those other countries is here we're letting the market and competition drive it. I mean, in the mobile world, it's a competitive marketplace. And speed, again, at least at the point of the curve we are, is important. I mean, and frankly, we were late to the game with 3G because of spectrum problems. And we saw the impact. And because people, once they got 3G, wanted it. And those devices developed to use it. So long as it's being driven in a competitive environment, and we're all trying to leapfrog each other, as I said, we'll have the fastest network at the end, 4G speeds, even though it's not in the ITU list of 4G technologies. I think it's fine, and I don't, I realize the FCC has to set a speed for certain purposes and all, but you're right, I wouldn't get too worked up about it. And then when something does come in as a matter of industrial policy, then you get in these things, well, okay, you put that out there, and what good is it doing?
Dale.
I'm sorry, as an engineer, I can't sit here any longer with the focus on speed, because obviously the other part of the thing is latency, and latency really does affect a lot of applications, and there's challenges, for example, in doing it via satellite, the normal synchronous satellite, because of that inherent latency, and some of the interactive games, and I believe some of the real-time video sort of things, really, latency can really present problems. So I'm just sitting here sort of, bothered, choking a little bit that we really do need to throw latency into that. I mean, I could give you tremendous bandwidth, for example, from here to Europe. If I loaded a huge oil tanker full of CDs, and you count how many bits I could deliver to you in Europe, I mean, it would be incredibly large. But it takes you, 7 days to get there, and that's latency. So I think we need to think about latency a little bit, just sort of a footnote to your discussion.
But that's a very important point, and actually, it's an opportunity to thank someone else, Dale, because your efforts helping the Broadband Technical Advisory Group, and that is an important effort, deserve tremendous appreciation from all of us in the industry. And I have to say, as a former student of yours, sitting here also thinking of all the different dimensions, and there are many that matter besides speed.
Dale, what are the policy levers to help with issues like latency? When I was at the FCC, I suggested increasing the speed of light, and Blair didn't come
Well,
for it.
we did debate it for 2 or 3 hours, if I recall.
Well, I do think one thing that it goes back to the importance of transparency and the suitability of certain services for certain applications. And I think you address this so the consumer knows, okay, this may have a lot of bandwidth, but the latency is going to be such that I'm not able to do some of the things that people who have other kinds of connections that have low latency. So I do come back to transparent. But what you do about it, I mean, you know, obviously you point out the speed of light. Some of the low orbiting orbit satellites, you know, try to reduce the latency by changing the technology. And the latency, you know, is made up, I don't want to go on too long here, but you know, there's different components of it. One, the sort of delivering, using the sort of analogy, you know, you can deliver the content over a separate network to get it close to the access network. That's one way of reducing latency. And of course, how fast your processors are running, your packet switches are running, and so forth, is the other components of that. But you know, you get into these the wireless networks, you get into congestion problems sometimes because just too many people end up at the same location, as Tom was saying. When that happens, you're going to get congestion delays that add to the latency.
Can I just add that I want to praise TPI. There was a blog about the broadband plan talking about the numbers that we put together, with the question being raised as to what extent should satellite take care of the final 0.3%, 0.5%, whatever. The stunning number, one of the stunning numbers we came up with was of the 7 million homes, it would take about $24 billion cap and OpEx over 10 years to get them the network. But the last 250,000 homes represent 14 billion of that. And so, you know, obviously we kind of imply that satellite should cover that, and that's what the blog post was about. But, and this goes to something I completely agree with what Carly said earlier, it's important to understand what the trade-offs are. I can tell you some rural senators might disagree precisely because of the latency problem, but we should understand there's a trade-off of latency versus incredible cost of over $50,000 per home. And you know, that's what policymakers should decide.
Yeah.
Manny Flores from Chairman of the Illinois Commerce Commission. A lot of discussion has been given to the speed, but what about security? You know, we talk about e-commerce just in the financial industry, for instance, the number of banks and other folks that lose a lot of money to fraud, or if you are in the utility sector, the concern that someone would hack into one of your systems, track how the system works, and other issues that have been raised to the fore. What can we do? And I'd like to hear some standards that are being considered to address this issue.
There's a bunch of conversations going on. I'm not really privy to them, though, so maybe someone else is.
Well, I'll just say, in terms we addressed it not in great detail because there were a lot of other government agencies that were dealing with obviously a very critical problem, a tremendous potential threat to the whole ecosystem. But that gets to a technical level that we just felt we did not have the expertise or time to really address. But I know there's a lot of other activity going on in the government about it.
But wouldn't you, I mean, one concern that I have, and here's, I think, part of the ongoing conversation here is, should we allow the technocrats in, let's say, in some of the governmental agencies dictate what the policy should be, or should we allow and encourage for the innovation that you can have by, you know, T-Mobile, you know, Time Warner or others who have a better sense of how this stuff really works, and to incent more innovation in this space? And that's, you know, that's why I think it's also important discussing in this kind of a forum.
Well, I mean, it's obviously a concern to any network operator, and Tom Talkie referred to it, and it's, I will say that government has a somewhat different role here than just as a regulator. I went to a dinner where the Deputy Secretary of Defense spoke and addressed, the general topic of cybersecurity. And actually, the Defense Department and the NSA probably have the state-of-the-art, tools in terms of dealing with such issues. And he was proposing that but that it affects national security, the insecurity of private networks. And he was putting on the table the idea of defense sort of, opening the kimono a bit and sharing some of those tools. Now, of course, how much can you share? And are you increasing vulnerability and, and so forth? But this may be one example, where not as a regulator, but as a user and network operator, that they've devoted the types of resources because they've been targeted so often and because it's so important that we may be able to learn something from them. I do think it's something that I get worried about sort of law regulations. As much as I love the FCC, was sort of my home, empowering the FCC to say carriers have to do this and off with your head if something bad happens, which is a very common approach to a problem like this.
I would say, just a quick response, is that there's so much being done, but it's done on an interagency and a public-private sector outreach. It certainly is not the jurisdiction of the FCC, but the FCC has a piece of it, but so does the Department of Justice, every single, obviously it's the one thing that probably wakes everybody up at night. It's the one thing that could make all of the rest of this discussion irrelevant. So there are these conversations going on kind of all over, and I think it's important that government participate in the conversations. I also think it's more important that they're private sector led, and they are, luckily, that there's a forum for that, several different forums, but there's leadership at the top from the White House with that going on.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, I was Andrew Keane from the Arts and Labs. I was very taken with Meredith's point about the decline of the free model. And I think that the next big shift will be from, in terms of what consumers get, broadband, will be, in terms of their value, they're going to be getting something else. They're not going to be getting the internet. They're going to be getting some sort of bundled, converged product, which enables them to access what we once called television and radio and movies and what we once called the internet. So I wonder if you could say more about why you think free will decline and what will be the implications in terms of potential business models, particularly in things like TV everywhere.
I'm happy to go first, but you probably have some very talented people on this panel. What I see when I talk to, say, newspapers, only the Wall Street Journal right now is actually making money by their online charge. But you talk to USA Today, and they certainly are they're going to bring everybody to USA Today's site, and it's going to be free, and then guess what? They're going to start charging for it. I think the content, as soon as we can get the security down for content and video, that's really what drives a lot about broadband penetration, so we want that. But we have to protect it, with copyright, and we also have to, at some point, they're going to need, they pay to produce it, they're probably going to want to get paid for people to watch it. There's always going to be free. I mean, of course, there's, I think our children spend an inordinate amount of time making videos and sticking them on the internet. I mean, I think there's that, but I think that we have gone to this internet where we think it's all free and everything on there is free. But as we go to this digital content transformation, where we're really everything that you paid for, your classifieds, that you buy your newspaper and you read the classifieds. Well, actually now you don't, because you go to Craigslist. I think as our life goes to online, then the things that we paid for in normal life, we're going to have to pay for online.
I thought that was very well said, and Andrew, when we've talked about it before, I think there's an evolution. I think it's really important to pay attention to what consumers want, and it's really important to offer things that are actually additional value, because when you talk about, the rhetoric of the end of free makes it seem like something's being taken away. So I don't like that sort of framing. I think the important thing to think about is being able to provide content or applications or services that are valuable because customers want them, that require either subscription or advertising or a mix of them or other types of revenue models. I don't know. I mean, I can look back and say, I remember playing Pong on Atari and thinking it was really cool. But if I was going to be asked at that age, design video games and how you're going to pay for them in the future, I wouldn't have the foggiest idea, nor would I want to constrain it on the basis of playing Pong. So I look at what's happening right now with the web, and the closest thing I can think of is what happened to television. And you go through an evolution where you can unleash a lot more creativity by offering things of value that people are willing to pay for. I think that's a great argument.
I think this really plays into the adoption issue. You know, I mean, when you see people saying, well, I'm not sure that I need internet. But if they go out and they decide that they're going to buy a new TV, and it's Wi-Fi equipped, and at Best Buy they say, would you like us to fire up this TV that can access programming for you? They may say, well, yeah, I'd like to have that. Again, I mean, I many times analogize the transportation model, but you know, a few moments ago I talked about the fact that people will buy a shirt from Land's End, and it'll say free shipping. Well, it's not really free shipping. The consumer doesn't have to go out and contract with FedEx or UPS, but there is transportation involved. And I think that as people begin to take advantage of new services and applications that are important to them, whether it is movies, whether it's maybe online gaming, maybe it's a healthcare service, maybe it's some new educational service, they're not going to begin to think of the fact that I'm signing up for internet. The internet service may be, in fact, bundled into the very offering that they're buying. And they're thinking that they're buying a product, and the internet service itself just becomes kind of incidental to that.
You know, one consequence of that I think we actually already see is that willingness to pay, what people say they're willing to pay for broadband, has come up quite significantly. And people are now saying they're willing to pay about $80 a month for a basic, reliable connection, which is about twice what they actually do pay. And a lot of that's because of this culture of free. We're still willing to pay these things, but it's sort of being incorporated into what you pay for broadband. I don't pay for the New York Times anymore because it's free. So presumably I'm willing to pay a little bit more for my broadband connection because of that, and so on.
Yeah, I was just going to, I completely agree with the remark you just made. I was going to remark, you know, the English language really doesn't serve us well on this debate because the word free has two distinct meanings, and we actually, it would very much help this debate if we used different words, perhaps just change language altogether. You know, the lack of expense, right? That's one meaning of free. And we're certainly headed, in the face of scarcity, you know, prices emerge, and we're certainly headed towards scarcity in some applications and in some modes, and therefore you would expect to see the, you know, expense. I don't think there's any doubt about that one. There is a different meaning. It's quite distinct, and it comes into conflict with that first one, that first meaning of free. And the different meaning is lack of restriction. That is limitation on action, right? Freedom in that sense. It's actually a much more difficult question, and particularly on the entrepreneurial side of the economy. The question that arises in the entrepreneur communities of the country is, what limitations will they face? It's a different meaning of free. What limitations will they face from other players in the ecosystem or from the government? And there, it's not so clear what the right answer is. It even comes into conflict in some very restrictive senses, and with the giving firms the ability to charge. And that one, actually, there's not a straightforward answer. I think, you know, this is a conversation we were having last night. I myself, I haven't come to the right conclusion on where you should draw lines on lack of restriction, but transparency of firms in the ecosystem certainly helps the entrepreneurial community. That is, if, as actually Tom Taki was saying, if the carrier is clear about its operational principles with the entrepreneurial entrant who's going to try something new, that actually helps. That helps both sides. It helps the innovation take place. The second meaning of lack of restriction is if the carrier is clear about how they're going to change things in the future. And again, announcing in advance that you're about to change things is another sense of transparency that helps the entrepreneurial community.
Okay, let's take two more questions, and then two questions right away, and then we'll answer them. I think that's about all we have. I know, Link, you have a question, and then Peter in the back.
Yeah, Link Owing with Verizon. A two-part question on price performance that Shane had raised on broadband and competition. On the price performance issue, when I was at Bell Atlantic back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we were selling T1 lines for between $300 and $2,000 at a speed of 1.5 megs. Today on Fios, you can get a 20 meg connection, and small businesses in many cases can get access to it for $89. In DSL in those days, we were selling it for about $50 to $60 a month, 768K. Today, we're talking about 10 meg and 2 meg on Fios. Price is about $45. So I'm just on the price performance metric, and the reason I raise it is I kind of get, you'll see in my blog post on Verizon, I spent a lot of time looking at these issues and has things improved. And to the FCC's credit, when they looked at this issue, I thought they did a good job of looking at applications that we need to run today and things that might be running in the future, and whether we're making a good progress in getting the speeds that need to do that. And I think in most of those we are. So the whole issue of that price performance comparison I think is really important. And I really do think the prices and the performance have really been amazing over the last 10 years. On the competition issue, the one thing that I'm really concerned about when we talk about competition is we tend to look at it either on the number of competitors, or in the case of Europe, we look at the number of companies that are selling services, even though many of them are probably using somebody else's network to do it. And I think it's actually more complex than that. And it's also more complex because in the internet ecosystem, you now have competition in new ways that we never even looked at before. So apps clearly compete with search, but they also compete with wireless carriers to some extent, because clearly a lot of us did sell apps on ourselves, and they also have a big effect on how we sell the service. So they do have a competitive effect. And I'd like people to talk about those two issues if you could.
Okay, let's get Peter's question, and then we'll answer that.
Peter Pitch with Intel. I'd like to ask the panelists to get some perspective here. If they could wave a wand and change one policy to improve broadband deployment, adoption, whatever, in the United States, what would it be?
Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start. Yeah. And I'll start because everything goes back to spectrum for us and all. So I'd wave my magic wand and have those incentive auctions that Blair had in his report, and get that 130 megahertz or 20, whatever it was, out of the broadcast band, in which they made money, and the band was more efficiently packed, and that very valuable spectrum, lower band spectrum, was made available for mobile broadband services. And I do think one of the we're focused sort of in the near term, and my company is, and many others are, on some nearer term targets in the spectrum world. But I do think the incentive auctions, not just for broadcast, but that's one target area, would be a big step forward. I'd like to wave my magic wand and have that appear. So,
I guess if I would focus on the deployment issue, and I would want to see USF targeted more discreetly, probably at the wire center level, so that USF support was really going directly at those areas that need the subsidy in order to have broadband deployed.
I joined Tom, not because of today, but I think the biggest threat to the internet ecosystem 10 years from now is a lack of spectrum to be put in the market 5 years from now, unless we do that. And I just would have to give Ruth Milkman and her team, which really wrote that chapter and came up with the idea of incentive auctions, a lot of credit for doing that.
I would have to say to proceed expeditiously with universal service fund reform, focusing on broadband, focus on unserved areas.
Oh, so I'll say something no one else has said. Okay, look, there's just hundreds of billions of dollars of investment being made each year, and the U.S. Congress hasn't made up its goddamn mind what it really wants the policies to be. Boy, can we dream? Because, man, having so much investment at risk because policy could change next year. That's a really bad situation. It's really.
We've done such a good job on this panel avoiding net neutrality.
I think Shane hit this right. I think Title VII definitely. But I also something different in taking a step back, and a bigger picture item I think is something that Carly talked about, which is R&D and R&D tax credit, and the fact that we don't have Bell Labs anymore. We have only applied research going on in the United States. We're losing our edge to other countries. We need some basic research. We need probably federal funding for it.
Okay. All right. Well, so we'll take a quick break. Please join me in thanking the panelists. Thanks a lot for that.